The massive starship Harmony's Dawn glided silently through the colorful clouds of the Veil Nebula. Inside its gleaming corridors, representatives from dozens of alien worlds prepared for the most important peace summit in galactic history. The ship buzzed with nervous energy as translators worked overtime, and diplomats reviewed their notes one final time. Princess Lyra Vell stood in the observation lounge, watching stars drift past the reinforced windows. Her pale blue skin shimmered, with tiny lights that pulsed gently with her heartbeat. As an Etherian, she could sense the emotions of everyone around her through telepathy. Right now she felt waves of anxiety, excitement, and hope flowing from the various alien delegates scattered throughout the ship. The insectoid Chitauri clicked and chittered in their corner, their razor-sharp mandibles gleaming under the soft lights. Their exoskeletons were works of art, decorated with intricate patterns that told the story of their hive worlds. Nearby, the crystalline Vorthak hummed in harmonious frequencies, their translucent bodies refracting light into beautiful, rainbow patterns across the walls. In the far corner of the lounge, almost forgotten by everyone else, sat the human delegation. There were only 5 of them, led by a young soldier named Kim Tae-ho. The humans looked so ordinary compared to the magnificent aliens around them. No natural armor, no telepathic abilities, no impressive size or strength. Just soft pink skin, simple clothing and basic equipment that seemed primitive next to the advanced technology surrounding them. Tae-ho checked his sidearm for the 3rd time that hour. As a corporal in Earth's colonial defense force, he'd drawn protection duty for this mission. Most of the aliens barely acknowledged his presence. To them, humans were the newest members of the galactic community, barely civilized enough to deserve. Faux seat at the table. They'd only achieved spaceflight a few decades ago, while some of these species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. The princess found herself watching the young human soldier. There was something different about him compared to the other species. While everyone else radiated either confidence or nervousness, the human seemed calm but alert. His dark eyes constantly scanned the room, noting exits and potential threats. She tried to touch his mind with her telepathy, curious about what he was thinking, but found something strange. His thoughts were there, but blocked by some kind of natural barrier she'd never encountered before. Suddenly, alarms began screaming throughout the ship. Red emergency lights bathed everything in an ominous glow as the captain's voice echoed. Through the speakers, "All hands to emergency stations, we are under attack, this is not a drill." The ship shuddered violently as something massive struck the hull. Princess Lyra Vell stumbled, her telepathic senses suddenly flooded with panic from hundreds of minds. The various alien delegates began shouting in their native languages, adding to the chaos. Through the observation windows, she could see enemy ships materializing out of nowhere. The separatist fleet had been waiting for them, hidden by advanced cloaking technology. Dozens of dark, angular vessels surrounded the diplomatic convoy, their weapons already charging for another strike. "Separatists!" someone screamed. "They want to stop the peace talks." Another massive explosion rocked the ship. This time, the lights went out completely for several seconds before emergency power kicked in. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone float briefly before slamming back down to the deck. Tae-ho was already moving. While the aliens stood frozen in shock or confusion, he grabbed his equipment pack and started herding civilians toward the emergency shelters. "Move! Everyone to the safe zones, now!" The ship's defensive weapons began firing back, but it was clear they were outnumbered and outgunned. The separatists had planned this ambush perfectly, knowing exactly when and where the diplomatic convoy would pass through this remote section of space. Princess Lyra Vell felt the ship's structure groaning under the assault. Through her telepathic abilities, she could sense the crew's growing desperation. The engineering teams were reporting critical failures in multiple systems. Life support was failing. The hull was breaching in dozens of places. Then came the worst. Hit yet. A massive energy beam tore through the diplomatic quarters, causing a chain reaction of explosions that rippled through several decks. The princess found herself thrown against a wall as debris rained down around her. When the dust settled, she realized with growing horror that she was trapped. A heavy support beam had collapsed across the corridor, completely sealing off her section of the ship. Worse, she could smell the acrid scent of toxic gases beginning to leak from damaged atmospheric processes. The emergency force fields were failing, and deadly radiation from the ship's damaged power core was starting to seep through the walls. Her telepathic distress call went out immediately, reaching every mind on the ship. The response was immediate but heartbreaking. One by one, potential rescuers calculated the risks and turned away. The Chitauri's natural exoskeletons couldn't handle the radiation levels. The Vorthak's crystalline bodies would shatter under the unstable gravity fields created by the ship's failing systems. Even her own Etherian guards were too weakened by the ship's damaged psionic dampeners to mount an effective rescue. As the toxic atmosphere grew thicker and her breathing became more labored, Princess Lyravel prepared to accept her fate. The peace summit would fail. The war would continue and billions would die because she couldn't escape this metal tomb. Then she saw him through the smoke and debris. Taeho was suiting up in emergency gear, completely ignoring the warnings being shouted at him by his fellow humans and the alien crew members. While everyone else had calculated the rescue as impossible, this ordinary human soldier was preparing to attempt it anyway. Taeho sealed his emergency suit and grabbed a plasma cutter from the nearby tool locker. The radiation detector on his belt was already clicking frantically, warning him about the deadly levels ahead. Around him, alien crew members were shaking their heads and backing away from the collapsed section. "It's suicide," hissed one of the Chitauri officers, his insectoid voice translated through the ship's computer. "The radiation will kill you before you reach her." "The structural damage is too severe," added a Vorthak engineer, her crystalline form shimmering with worried colors. "One wrong move and the entire section will collapse." Taeho ignored them all. He'd heard the princess's telepathic scream for help, even though he couldn't understand it the way the others could, but he'd seen her face through the security monitors, watched her trying to stay calm as toxic gases filled her prison. That was enough. The young soldier squeezed through the first gap in the twisted metal, his smaller human frame allowing him to pass where the bulkier aliens couldn't follow. The corridor ahead looked like a nightmare. Pipes had burst, spraying superheated steam across his path. Electrical cables sparked and writhed like angry snakes. The floor had buckled upward in some places and dropped away completely in others. Through her fading security feed, Princess Lyravel watched in amazement as Taeho navigated obstacles that had stopped beings with far superior technology and evolution. When a damaged support beam blocked his path, he didn't call for specialized equipment like the other species would have. Instead, he used his plasma cutter to slice through it, then wedged the pieces apart with a crowbar he'd found in the debris. The ship groaned ominously around him as he crawled through spaces that were getting smaller with each passing minute. The hull was continuing to collapse, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before this entire section was crushed or vented into space. When a shower of sparks from a severed power line blocked his way, Taeho didn't retreat to find another route. He simply rerouted the power using some basic tools and wire he'd salvaged from the wreckage. It was crude, improvised engineering. That would have horrified the advanced alien technicians, but it worked. "How is he doing that?" whispered an Etherian engineer watching the monitors. "He has no formal training in our systems." "Humans," muttered the ship's captain, a wise old Vorthak whose crystal body had seen many wars. "They don't know when something is impossible, so they just do it anyway." Taeho finally reached the sealed chamber where Princess Lyravel waited. The thick metal door had been warped by the explosions, and the electronic locks were completely dead. He could see her through a small window, her blue skin now pale with oxygen deprivation as the toxic gases grew thicker. She immediately tried to establish telepathic contact, hoping to guide him through the rescue process. But when her mind touched his, she recoiled in surprise. His thoughts were completely unlike anything she'd ever encountered. Where other species had organized logical thought patterns, Taeho's consciousness seemed chaotic and wild. But there was something else there too, something that made her gasp. His mind was naturally shielded, not by technology or training, but by some innate human characteristic she'd never seen before. Her telepathic abilities couldn't penetrate his thoughts, but more importantly, The psychic feedback that was overwhelming other potential rescuers couldn't affect him either. The radiation-induced neural static that had forced her own guards to retreat was just background noise to his naturally resilient human brain. "Can't hear you in my head, Princess," Taeho called through the warped door as he began cutting through the twisted metal. "Guess we'll have to do this the old-fashioned way." He worked methodically, using the plasma cutter to slice through the doctor frame while Princess Lyravel watched in fascination. Every few seconds he'd pause to check his radiation detector or adjust his suit's filtration system. The levels of deadly energy in this section would have killed most species within minutes, but somehow the human kept working. When part of the ceiling collapsed behind him, blocking his escape route, Taeho didn't panic. He simply found another way out, crawling through ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels that were never meant for emergency evacuation. His ability to adapt and improvise under impossible pressure amazed the princess. Finally, the door gave way. Taeho grabbed Princess Lyravel and fitted her with an emergency breathing mask, then began the dangerous journey back through the collapsing ship. They moved together through passages that were getting narrower by the minute, with him leading the way and her following his hand signals when verbal communication became impossible over the noise of groaning metal and escaping gases. Just as they reached the escape pod bay, the ship's main power core finally gave out. The lights died completely, and they could hear the hull beginning its final collapse. Emergency pods were launching all around them as survivors fled the dying vessel. Taeho shoved the princess into the nearest pod and sealed the hatch just as a massive explosion tore through the ship behind them. The pod launched automatically, carrying them away from the fireball that had once been the diplomatic vessel. But their escape came at a cost. The explosion had damaged their pod's navigation systems and engines. Instead of rendezvousing with the rescue fleet, they were falling toward the surface of a nearby jungle moon, completely cut off from any hope of immediate rescue. As they crashed through the alien forest canopy, Princess Lyravel looked at her human savior with new respect. While beings with superior technology and evolution had calculated her rescue as impossible, this ordinary soldier had made it look routine. She was beginning to understand that there might be more to humanity than the galactic community realized. The escape pod crashed through thick branches and vines before slamming into the jungle floor with a bone-jarring impact. Steam hissed from its damaged hull as Princess Lyravel and Taeho slowly picked themselves up from the twisted wreckage. The pod's emergency beacon was dead, its communication systems fried by the explosion that had destroyed their ship. Princess Lyravel stepped out onto the alien soil and immediately felt overwhelmed. The jungle around them was a maze of towering trees with purple bark and leaves that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Strange sounds echoed from the dense undergrowth, and the air was thick with humidity and unfamiliar scents. Her royal education had covered diplomacy, mathematics, and galactic history, but nothing had prepared her for raw survival in a hostile environment. Taeho, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. He moved through the alien forest like he'd been born there, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for threats and opportunities. Within minutes, he'd identified a small stream nearby and started testing the water with a portable analyzer from his emergency kit. "Safe to drink," he announced, filling their water containers, "but we'll need to boil it first just to be sure." The princess watched in amazement as he began gathering materials for shelter. Using nothing but a combat knife and some wire from the crashed pod, Taeho wove together branches and broad leaves to create a waterproof lean-to against a large tree. His movements were efficient and practiced, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Where did you learn these skills?" she asked, genuinely curious. In her world, specialized teams handled every task. There were engineers for building, biologists for identifying safe food, and security experts for protection. The idea that one person could do all of these things was foreign to her. Taeho smiled as he tested the strength of their improvised shelter. Every human learns basic survival skills in school. You never know when you might need them. Plus, I grew up camping with my family in the mountains back on Earth. As the alien sun began to set, painting the jungle in strange orange and purple hues, Tae-ho started a fire using friction between two dry sticks. Princess Liravel had seen fire-making devices before, advanced tools that could create flames, instantly. But watching him create fire from nothing but wood and determination was somehow more impressive. "Your species fascinates me," she admitted, as they sat by the crackling flames. "The galactic community considers humans primitive, yet you navigate challenges that would stump our greatest minds." Tae-ho poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the darkening sky. "Maybe that's because we don't overthink everything. When you've got a problem, sometimes the simple solution is the right one." Their conversation was interrupted by a low growling sound from the darkness beyond their firelight. Something large was moving through the underbrush, circling their camp. Princess Liravel tensed, her telepathic senses picking up alien thoughts filled with hunger and predatory focus. "There's something out there," she whispered. "Something dangerous." Tae-ho calmly picked up a burning branch from their fire and stepped toward the edge of their camp. Instead of showing fear, he made himself appear larger and began making loud noises, shouting and banging his metal water bottle against a tree. The growling stopped, followed by the sound of something large retreating into the jungle. "Most predators are opportunists," he explained, returning to the fire. "They want easy, prey, not a fight. Make yourself look dangerous and most of them will find something easier to hunt." Over the next few days, Princess Liravel received an education unlike anything in her formal schooling. Tae-ho showed her how to identify edible plants by testing small amounts and watching for reactions. He taught her to read the signs of weather changes in the alien sky and to find direction by observing the movement of the strange double moons overhead. When she expressed doubt about eating some of the local fruit they'd found, Tae-ho laughed. "My ancestors survived ice ages, plagues and natural disasters with nothing but stone tools and their wits. I think we can handle some alien berries." His confidence was infectious. The princess found herself attempting tasks she would never have considered before. She learned to weave plant fibers into rope, to identify animal tracks in the soft jungle soil, and to build simple traps for catching small creatures that resembled a cross between birds and lizards. "Your people would have negotiated with these creatures," Tae-ho joked as they cooked their catch over the fire. "Tried to establish diplomatic relations with a bird." "Perhaps," she laughed, surprised to find herself enjoying the simple meal they'd prepared together. "We Etherians prefer peaceful solutions to all problems." "Nothing wrong with that," Tae-ho said seriously. "But sometimes the universe doesn't give you a choice. Sometimes you have to fight for what matters." On their fourth night on the jungle moon, they spotted lights moving through the forest in the distance. Not the natural glow of the native plants, but the harsh white beams of artificial searchlights. The separatist forces had found their trail. Princess Liravel felt her heart sink. They had no weapons except Tae-ho's sidearm and knife, no communication equipment, and no way to call for help. The enemy forces would have advanced tracking technology, superior numbers, and military training. "We should hide," she suggested. "Wait for them to pass, then try to find another way off this moon." Tae-ho was quiet for a long moment, watching the distant lights grow closer. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Gone was the casual, friendly tone she'd grown accustomed to. Now he sounded like the professional soldier he was. "Princess, hiding isn't going to work. They're tracking us, which means they'll find us eventually. And when they do, we'll be trapped with nowhere to run. Then what do you suggest?" Tae-ho began gathering their supplies and scattering the fire. "We're going to do what humans do best. We're going to turn this jungle into their worst nightmare." The searchlights grew brighter as the enemy patrol moved deeper into the jungle. Princess Liravel could hear their voices now, speaking in the harsh military dialect of the separatist forces. Through her telepathic abilities, she sensed their confidence. They expected to find two helpless survivors hiding in fear. They had no idea what was coming. Tae-ho had transformed completely from the friendly soldier she'd come to know. His movements became silent and precise as he led her through the darkness, avoiding the patrol's advanced scouts, with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. He'd spent hours studying the jungle's natural rhythms, learning which sounds were normal and which ones would alert enemies to their presence. "Stay close," he whispered, guiding her around a cluster of thorny vines. Step where I step, breathe when I breathe. We're ghosts now. The first trap was simple but effective. Tae-ho had spent the afternoon sharpening wooden stakes and hiding them in a shallow pit along one of the main animal trails. He'd covered the trap with a thin layer of leaves and dirt, making it invisible in the darkness. When the point man of the enemy patrol stepped into it, his scream echoed through the forest before being cut short. The separatists immediately went into defensive formation, their weapons raised and scanning the jungle around them. But Tae-ho was already moving to his next position, a cluster of rocks overlooking their path. He'd prepared this ambush site hours earlier, gathering stones that fit perfectly in his hands. Princess Lyravel watched in amazement as he began throwing rocks, with deadly accuracy. Not at the soldiers themselves, but at the equipment hanging from their belts. A well-aimed stone knocked out one soldier's communication device, another shattered a night vision scope. A third sent a weapon spinning out of reach into the undergrowth. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Why not attack them directly?" "Because I'm not trying to kill them," Tae-ho replied quietly. "I'm trying to make them afraid. Fear makes people stupid, and stupid enemies make mistakes." His strategy was working. The patrol was becoming increasingly paranoid, jumping at every sound and shadow. They'd lost their technological advantages one by one, and now they were fighting on Tae-ho's terms. He knew this jungle better than they did, despite having been here for only a few days. The second trap was psychological. Tae-ho had collected some of the glowing jungle fungi and arranged them in patterns around the enemy's camp while they slept. When the soldiers woke up, they found mysterious symbols surrounding them, glowing softly in the darkness. Princess Lyravel could sense their confusion and growing fear through her telepathic abilities. "They think the jungle itself is alive and hunting them," she whispered in amazement. "Let them think that," Tae-ho replied. "Superstition is a weapon, too." Over the next 2 days, the hunters became the hunted. Tae-ho turned the jungle into a maze of traps, false trails, and psychological warfare. He used the natural sounds of the forest to mask his movements, imitating animal calls to confuse enemy scouts. He left false evidence of their passage in one direction while actually moving in another. When the separatists tried to use their advanced tracking technology, they found their sensors scrambled by strategically placed metal fragments from the escape pod. When they attempted to call for reinforcements, their communications were jammed by a makeshift signal blocker Tae-ho had built from spare parts. "Your people would negotiate," he told the princess as they watched another patrol stumble through one of his diversionary trails. "They'd try to find a peaceful solution, offer to surrender in exchange for safe passage." "And your people?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand the answer. "My people prefer to make the other side do the dying." The princess was learning concepts completely foreign to her peaceful, hierarchical society. Tae-ho taught her to think like a human, to see opportunity where others saw only obstacles. When she pointed out that they were outnumbered 10-1, he smiled grimly. "Numbers don't matter when the enemy doesn't know where you are or when you'll strike next. Guerrilla warfare isn't about winning battles. It's about making the enemy wish they'd never started the war." She watched him prepare another trap. This one using vines and counterweights to create a snare that would leave enemies hanging upside down from the trees. The craftsmanship was crude compared to the advanced technology she was used to, but it was undeniably effective. "The galaxy sees us as primitive because we still fight," Tae-ho explained, as he tested the trigger mechanism. "Most advanced species have evolved beyond physical conflict. They solve problems through negotiation, technology, or superior intellect." "And that's bad?" she asked. "Not bad, just limiting. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you a choice. Sometimes you have to be willing to get your hands dirty to protect what matters." When she suggested they could simply surrender to prevent further bloodshed, Tae-ho stopped what he was doing and looked at her seriously. "Princess, some things are worth dying for. But more importantly, some things are worth killing for. Your peace treaty is one of them. If these separatists capture you, the war continues and billions die. That's not happening on my watch." She began to understand why the galactic community both needed and feared humanity. Other species might be stronger, smarter, or more technologically advanced, But humans possessed something unique that more civilized races had lost. They had an absolute refusal to accept defeat, combined with a willingness to use any means necessary to protect what they valued. By the end of the week, the enemy force had been reduced from 30 soldiers to fewer than 10. The survivors were exhausted, paranoid, and jumping at shadows. They'd lost most of their equipment and all of their confidence. Tejo had turned a simple survival situation into a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, using nothing but human ingenuity and an absolute refusal to give up. The rescue fleet arrived. 3 days later, their massive ships casting shadows over the jungle moon as they entered orbit. Princess Lyravel could sense the relief and excitement of the search teams through her telepathic abilities as they finally located the crash site. But what they found on the surface left them stunned and horrified. The separatist forces had been completely eliminated, not through advanced technology or superior firepower, but through what could only be described as a methodical campaign of jungle warfare. The enemy soldiers' equipment lay scattered throughout the forest, their weapons disabled, their vehicles sabotaged, their communication systems destroyed. Commander Veltar of the Etherian Rescue Fleet stood among the wreckage, his blue skin, pale with shock. Around him, alien investigators tried to piece together what had happened. The Chitauri forensics experts clicked nervously as they examined the improvised traps and ambush sites. The Vorthak analysts hummed discordant frequencies as they studied the psychological warfare tactics that had been employed. 30 professional soldiers, Commander Veltar whispered to his aide. Armed with the latest military technology, trained in advanced combat techniques. How could 2 crash survivors accomplish this? The answer became clear when they found Tejo and Princess Lyravel waiting calmly at the original crash site. The human soldier had built them a comfortable shelter and was cooking some kind of local stew over a well-maintained fire. He looked up casually as the rescue teams approached, as if defeating an entire enemy force was just another day's work. "Took you long enough," he said with a slight smile. "Princess, your ride's here." Princess Lyravel stood and faced the rescue teams, but her expression was different now. Gone was the sheltered royal who had boarded the diplomatic ship weeks ago. Her time in the jungle had changed her in ways that went far deeper than the simple survival skills she'd learned. "Commander Veltar," she said formally, "I need to make an official report about what happened here." The debriefing took place aboard the flagship of the rescue fleet. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the main conference room to hear Princess Lyravel's testimony. What she told them challenged everything they thought they knew about humanity and their place in the galactic community. "When our ship was attacked and I became trapped," she began, "every species calculated the rescue attempt and deemed it too dangerous. The radiation levels were too high for the Chitauri. The structural instability would have crushed the Vorthak. Even my own Etherian guards were weakened by the ship's failing systems." She paused, looking around the room at the assembled alien dignitaries. "Only the human acted. While we debated and calculated risks, Corporal Tejo simply grabbed emergency equipment and went to save me. He didn't consider the danger. He didn't weigh the odds, he just did what needed to be done." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The Chitauri delegates clicked nervously, while the Vorthak hummed in confused harmonics. This challenged their fundamental understanding of logical decision-making. "But that's just the beginning," Princess Lyravel continued. "When we crashed on this moon and were hunted by enemy forces, I witnessed something extraordinary. This human transformed our desperate situation into their advantage. He turned a jungle moon into a weapon against our enemies." She gestured to a holographic display showing the battlefield analysis. 30 trained soldiers with advanced equipment were defeated by one human, using nothing but improvised tools and tactics that none of our military academies teach. He employed strategies that our computers would classify as impossible or inefficient. One of the Chitauri generals interrupted. "Princess, with respect, these tactics seem unnecessarily brutal. Why not attempt negotiation or strategic withdrawal?" "Princess," Lyravel smiled, "that's exactly what I suggested. But Corporal Tejo taught me something that has fundamentally changed my understanding of survival and conflict. He said that some things are worth dying for, but more importantly, some things are worth fighting for. She stood and walked to the center of the room. Fellow delegates, we've made a crucial error in our assessment of humanity. We've dismissed them as primitive because they still engage in warfare, because they refuse to accept defeat, because they solve problems through action rather than endless analysis. The room fell silent as she continued. But what if those traits aren't weaknesses? What if they're exactly what our galaxy needs? While we were calculating risks and debating options, the human was already saving lives. While we sought diplomatic solutions to the separatist threat, he was eliminating it entirely. Commander Veltar leaned forward in his chair. "Princess, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we've been looking at this backwards," she replied. "We've tried to position humanity as junior partners in our galactic community, species that need our guidance and protection, but maybe it's the other way around. Maybe we're the ones who need them." She activated another holographic display, this one showing galactic conflict zones where peaceful species had been overwhelmed by more aggressive forces. How many times have we been forced to retreat or compromise because we weren't willing to fight for our principles? How many wars could have been prevented if we'd had someone willing to take the risks we calculated as unacceptable? The assembled delegates began to understand the implications of her words. For centuries, the advanced species had prided themselves on evolving beyond physical conflict. They developed sophisticated diplomatic protocols, advanced negotiation techniques, and complex systems for peaceful resolution of disputes. But they'd also lost something in the process. They'd lost the willingness to take decisive action when everything else failed. "I propose a new alliance structure," Princess Liravel announced. "Not one where humanity serves as our junior partner, but one where they serve as our guardians. They possess something we've evolved beyond, something we desperately need." "And what's that?" asked a Vorthak elder. "The absolute refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. The willingness to risk everything for what they believe is right. The ability to find hope and opportunity in the most desperate situations." She looked directly at Tae-ho, who had been quietly listening from the back of the room. "Corporal, you taught me that the most dangerous person is one with nothing left to lose. But I realize something else. Humans never believe they have nothing left to lose. There's always another option. Always another way to fight. Always hope for victory, even when logic says defeat is certain." The conference room buzzed with excited conversation as species that had never seriously considered human capabilities began to reassess everything. Princess Liravel had given them a new perspective on the newest members of their galactic community. Months later, as she prepared for another diplomatic mission with Tae-ho assigned as her permanent security detail, Princess Liravel smiled at her human protector. "Ready for another impossible mission, Corporal?" Tae-ho grinned back, checking his equipment one final time. "Princess, impossible is just another word for Tuesday." As their ship launched toward the next crisis zone, other species throughout the galaxy were beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or intelligence. It was their complete and utter refusal to believe that any problem couldn't be solved with enough determination, creativity, and willingness to take risks that more logical species would never consider. The age of human guardianship had begun.